Today in the Word, we're going to be reading 1 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 7. Verse 7. A man should not wear anything on his head when worshiping, for man is made in God's image and reflects God's glory, and woman reflects man's glory. For the first man didn't come from woman, but the first woman came from man. And man was not made for woman, but woman was made for man. So, hunting season is officially over for deer, where I'm at. And I was just on a final hunt for about a week at my buddy's property where I killed my last two deer. And this man is fantastic. He's an elder at the church I used to go to. And got to be one of my favorite people. One of the few people that I still talk with at that church. And he invites me. He's like, hey, do you still have some tags? I'm going down to the property and going to be there for a while. So I do, and we go down. And we didn't kill anything. It was extremely cold. It was a lot of sitting in the stand, freezing our butt offs for probably from like Tuesday. We started hunting Wednesday, and we were there till Saturday. So a lot of hunting. We saw some stuff, but... So anyways, but while we're there, he's a church elder. We had a lot of great conversations, and eventually, kind of out of the blue, out of nowhere, we get talking about stuff that we talk about on this channel, right? The church, some of the deficiencies there, how it's become an effeminate church. It's become a place that's not really safe for men. And we talk about relationships and dating in the world, the problems with our culture. We talk about, the delay in marriage now by like 8 years and some of the degeneracy going on, all that stuff. Problems with men, problems with women. And, there was a difference of opinion there, right? There was a difference of like, what's going on here? What's the right approach? And I love this man more than anything in the world. So I don't really have anything bad to say about him. He's just been fantastic. He's not really when I was going to church, but even just recently kind of been a good friend. And so, yeah, fantastic guy. But you do see, because he's been a church leader for a long time, there is some of that, some of the problems that I see in the church, and with the mindset of some of the leadership, right? This whole abandoning of biblical values for the sake of making people feel comfortable in today's society. This like egalitarian approach. That we see in the church and all that stuff, right? I still see that, being a boomer and being in the church. And there was still that, that tension, right? And the great thing is, like, I got to listen and hear from him, and he got to listen and hear from me. So the word is out there, right? I wasn't, like, mincing words, and I was very forthright about what is going on and what my thoughts are and what the thoughts are of a lot of young men in my age group, in my friend group. And I think that's part of the reason, him being a church leader, he also leads like Sunday school for young adults, So I think he kind of wanted this opportunity even to talk with me about it. He actually wanted to. He's like, let's talk more about this. And we talked for a while. And so he probably wanted. And that right there is a great approach, right? If you're a church leader and you're older, you want to know what's going on with your congregation, what's going on with the young people, what struggles are they facing, and everything like that. And, I don't have all the answers, but I'm a good person to ask because I'm in that age bracket. I'm going through stuff like that. I got a lot of friends. So I think he was just taking advantage of this opportunity. So kudos to him for sure, But there was still that, like, you could tell there wasn't a total meeting of the minds, right? You could tell there was that compromise, right? which like I know, knows the Bible well, obviously, like he knows what's in the scriptures, but there's still that tendency to there's that tendency to mold what's said in the scripture and to change it to kind of fit the modern day look on men and women, right? So anyways, it was a good time. It was very telling though, because it confirms a lot of the stuff that I've learned, is that, church leadership is, the older people in the church are what lead and direct the teachings and the stances that the church has. And then just like him and just like a lot of people in the church, it was like this idea where kind of like taking what I guess they would assume is the reasonable route, which is like, all right, here's what the Bible says, but here's how we're going to apply it. Here's where we're going to put the emphasis. So it's really kind of this concession, between biblical principles and the more progressive feminist culture we live in. It's like this meeting in the middle. And for some reason, the church has taken that approach. And I saw it in my discussion with this particular, elder of the church on our hunting trip. And we had, a lot of good talks. So, but I must say, regardless, we need more conversations like that. Even though me and him didn't totally agree on stuff, it was worth me hearing his side, and it was worth him hearing my side. And we just need those discussions. We need elders in the church to reach out to young men, see what's going on, right? And we just need more of that. And we don't see much of that. And I had a unique position where I got to have that, right, with this man. And even though we didn't agree, and even though in some sense I was kind of disappointed, but also I wasn't really surprised at his approach, kind of the way he compromised in his head with the scripture. But at the end of the day, like, we need discussions like that. We need our voice to be heard. If the church is ever going to be redeemed, if men are ever going to be supported in the church or in society. So, and to be honest with you right now, it's like we've got the statistics and everything on our side. And that's kind of what I was even telling him. Part of the discussion went into like, because, he's older, so he remembers, back in, I don't know however old he is, maybe back in the 60s. I think he was born in the 60s, right? Or around there. So there's this idea where maybe he even said, like, I saw one side where men had too much. They weren't they weren't kept accountable. Like this whole, we talked about the Me Too stuff, right? And I told him, like, a lot of guys are hurt by the Me Too stuff. They don't want to approach women. That was like, I think that was like cited as like 60 some odd percent of men say they don't approach women because of that, because of the fear of coming off as a creep or being something happening, right, due to them trying to get out there and everything like that. And that's part of the contributing factor to people not marrying and stuff like that. And that is a direct result of the feminist movement, right? Empowering women and kind of like pushing down on what they deem as toxic masculinity. So we talked about that, and he said, like, I do see the problem there, but I also know a time when, men were able to kind of get away with stuff, and that, it resulted in a lot of, some harm and some bad situations. So his kind of view was like, we started here where men were given too much power, and we needed some of that. We needed some of that feminist movement, and now we just kind of need to bring back to a balance. And, and I forget how the discussion went, but basically one of my points was, we're seeing the way it's going. And he was saying, like, we need to go a little bit more in that direction to balance it, right? We need to push this kind of feminist push almost. He didn't word it like that, obviously, because, he didn't want to put that title on it or be associated with the feminist movement. But he was kind of in favor of some of those, at least in the way he was talking, some of those ideas. And I was telling him, like, we can keep going in that direction, but the result is not what you want. The result is that men they're not coming to the middle. Statistics show that now women are being more, people are being radicalized. Men supposedly are becoming more right, more traditional, more all that stuff. And women are becoming further secular, progressive, further left. Men are leaning more right. Women are leaning more left. So this supposed compromise, this supposed let's make a more balance of the powers, right? Empower women a little bit more. So it'll fix all these, like, I don't know, whatever. Wives getting beat by their husband, I don't know, or in the workplace. I understand the goal a little bit, right? But the result, and I showed him, the result is not what you want. It's not going anywhere good. We're seeing where it's going. We have the results. The results are in. The results are in. The results are 6.1 birth rate. Instead of getting married at 20, people are getting married at like 30, men and women. Half of all families, households, are headed by married couples. People aren't having kids. People aren't getting married. 50% divorce rate, something like that. Right? So those are the results. And I pointed that out to him. Can it really get much worse than extinction? Right? I feel like we're pretty far into it. And what's happening is we're going extinct, right? So it's like, okay, you can have like a lot more married couples having kids, and then you have some bad eggs that exercise their authority, and you get some women that are being led by misogynist men that don't love them enough, right? That's one side. But this little experiment, does it get much worse than extinction? No longer existing, no longer having families, no longer having kids. Does it get much worse than that? So I told them, these are the fruits. Like, these are the fruits. We can argue that, 60 years ago, I don't know, maybe some men were left unchecked. We can argue that. I'm not arguing that, but we can. But what we know for a fact is that this whole experiment, we know the results. We have them. And they're not good. And the prospects are even worse, because the prospects are men and women are identifying, their values are identifying separate. Further, they're more polarized now, the way men and women think. So it's like, okay, you've had your time. We've seen what's happened in the church and in society when we lean this way, when we become more feminized, when we hound on the men in the sermons. And I talked to him about that, right? The general predisposition of the church to the men. And I think he acknowledged that. Actually, he noticed that, right? As an elder, like we have. So he noticed that. He didn't come to the same conclusion, but he did notice that. It's become almost hostile towards men. And definitely not supportive, right? At the best, apathetic. So we have the results, and the results are not good. The result is absolute extinction, breakdown of the family, delay of the family. Does it get much worse than that, right? It's like, I even told Mom, it's like, okay, well, now you don't have to worry about wives being oppressed by their overbearing husband or any of that stuff, because they're not marrying, because they're not having kids, because they're not getting in relationships. So in some sense, you fixed it by completely ruining it, so that they're not even getting in relationships where any of that patriarch and oppression can flourish, because they're not even in relationships now. And I mean, he was kind of like, he acknowledged it. It was like, oh shoot, wow, great point. So at any rate, we now can negotiate and talk and discuss from a point, unfortunately, of power. Because, not power, but just this idea that everything we're saying is supported. All of their ways and all of their ideals, they're coming true, right? The empowerment and men being kept down, all that stuff. However you want to paint it, that's what's going on in the church and in society. And they've had it their way, and this is the result. So maybe I can say, okay, I don't know the answer to all this. I don't know where that balance is. But one thing I can say with a fact is that it didn't work, and it's horrible. And I can even say it's worse, right? It's like, okay, maybe you had some oppressive relationships and stuff like that, when women couldn't just like willy-nilly leave their husband and stuff like that. And you had some tyrannical men in the 50s or whatever. Maybe you had that, but you had a lot of great relationships, a lot of great marriages, a lot of great families. Now it's like, okay, well, you can't even have those oppressive relationships because you're not having any. So you've thrown out all the good to get rid of some of the bad eggs. Anyhow, something I've been listening to this pastor, and I mean, he was way ahead of his time. He's talking about these problems, the way we're headed, and about how the church has become like not good for men, and the problems with relationships now. And he was like 5 years ahead of his time, right? And the way I heard him put it is that we read here in Scripture that God has a way for us to interact. The way he put it is that we have certain notes we sing as men, and women have certain notes that they sing. And the men, it's like a chord, right? You can both, like the world wants to tell you, okay, you can sing the same note. Men can sing a G, and women can sing a G in a relationship. But the result is a pretty dull note. It's not a chord, right? It takes 3 notes to make a chord. God, you look at the way he made things, right? The structure, how woman was made for man, right? We're singing different notes. Men are singing a G, women are singing a C note. But the result is you have harmony. You have a chord. You have harmony. Different notes, but the result is a beautiful harmonizing sound. And you have the church, right? They're trying to push this idea we sing the same notes. And at best, you have a dull relationship. But oftentimes, you just have people not getting in relationships, or you have divorce and stuff like that. Because they don't want to acknowledge that God made us to sing different notes. And that's the beauty of it, right? And that's kind of what's going on here, right? Like you even read this in 1 Corinthians 11, that man reflects God's glory, right? Verse 7. Man is made in the image of God and reflects God's glory. And woman reflects man's glory. That's in the Bible. I've got it right here. For the first man didn't come from woman, but the first woman came from man. She was made out of man. And then it says, verse 9, and man was not made for woman, but woman was made for man. Now just imagine, this is not preached in the church. This is my problem with a lot of the churches, is they have these scriptures in the Bible. Paul's telling us in the epistles the way God has us singing different notes, the order of creation. And the church does not acknowledge it because it's not popular, because it doesn't fit in with society. They will say, I am for traditional relationships. I am for biblical marriage, right? They will say that. This is it, right here. It's not this complementarian, like we're equal, but we have different roles, or even worse, we're just completely like have the same role. We're singing the same note. Though a lot of churches say that. But the ones that think like the Southern Baptists or whatever, I don't know, not to out you if you're Southern Baptist. There's some good Southern Baptist churches out there. But they will think they're radical. They will think they're very biblical and traditional when they say, oh, we're complementarian. Men and women are different. Men are strong. They're providers. Women are homemakers and they do all this stuff. But they won't acknowledge the truth of God's creation. They will think that they're so different. But when it comes down to it, they teach the same crap. They have the same demeanor towards men. They, like a woman's sermon, preaching to women is all about like, I don't know. It's always like encouraging and good. And then the men, it's like, man, we need to address the men and the sin going on. And the lust and the porn and like, men, you need to step up. And there's all of that. And you got these burly guys with beards and they think they're doing good for society but the stem of that comes from a man that thinks that men are the problem and he needs to solve it and he knows the answer and he's going to preach to you and call you to arms and stuff like that. It's like we have had that for long enough and the results are, I've already said all of it, the results are what they are. And it's not working and it's bad. And then in addition to that, you'll never hear him acknowledge that a woman was made for man. A woman was made for men. In fact, they'll do the opposite. They'll try to jump in and be like, and God, He didn't make you to please a man. He didn't make you to, this is a mutual, husbands, you gotta love your wives, and women, like, it's a partnership, right? They'll do all of that, and it sounds so good. It sounds good, but it's not true. It's just not true. It's not true. It's not how God ordered things. And that's when you have people singing the same notes. They're not harmonizing. And it sounds like it'll result in great relationships. Like, oh, now men are going to like women more and they're going to like men more because we're all like, equal and stuff like that. But it didn't happen, guys. The experiment's over. The results came in. Society's falling apart. All thanks to this message. So, just know whenever you talk about this stuff that you've got, the stats are on your side, man. It didn't work. It's not working. They're making fools of themselves. It didn't work. So, and that is the note. That's the proper note. Man was made in the image of God, reflects God's glory. A woman reflects man's glory. I'm not even saying this. I'm reading the freaking Bible. And man was not made for woman, but woman was made for man. You don't get that preaching, man. You don't get that preaching. You get this idea like, men, you have a bunch of responsibilities, and one of them is to please your woman. And yeah, we'll call you the leader and stuff like that, but in reality, what they really think, what they really believe in the church is that, big part of your responsibility is happy wife, happy life. Your idea is to be there for your woman. And then it's this idea of ignoring women and their responsibility. It's like when the Bible says that your responsibility as a woman is you were made for man, right? And it's a good thing. You will be happy in a relationship with kids, right? You were made for man. God knew it. Paul knew it. The early church knew it. But, all the parents, they're just, they don't act like it. They'll say they're for these, biblical ideals, but the first thing they do is send their daughters off to college for 4 years and then encourage them to pursue a relationship. So they'll say, okay, men, here's the big thing. Here's the big one that I noticed. In the church, they'll tell you, or just in general, men, we believe you are the leader, right? You're the leader and you're the provider. But we're not going to encourage you to lead or women to submit, so you're no longer a leader. And we're going to send all of our young women off to college so they can provide for themselves. So now you're not the provider. They will say it. You're the leader or provider. But, we're not going to support you in leading, and we're going to encourage women to provide for themselves. I don't know how to say it any other way. That's just what's going on. And anyways, I get worked up about this stuff. Because it's you don't have to look far to realize we should have never been doing this. And that, it just doesn't work, man. So in some sense, it's just not a lot of churches are not a safe place for men because of this. Even if on the surface they look like they are, judge them by their fruits. Listen to what they're saying. Listen closely to what is being preached, right? And then something else we talked about, and I'll leave it at this. So I was talking with this elder, right, on our hunting trip. And he's kind of asking me what I think some solutions are. And one thing he said is that, well, how do you address this? If you're talking, about women, how does a pastor talk about that? Maybe it's not his place to just, talk to women in the service and have sermons about them. And my thought was, and what I told him is well, we're already doing that for the men, right? How many times have we heard a sermon about the things wrong with men, the way men aren't stepping up? They'll even they'll say, look at all these godly young women, right? You got to deserve her respect. Would you think about how you date? This is God's daughter. Like, all that stuff. Like, if you're in the church, you know it. If you haven't been in the church that long, just bear with me, right? But that's kind of the message. It's this idea that their responsibility in the church is to call men to arms, to hold men accountable, to preach to men, to only address the men, to fix men, That's the biggest thing. To fix all the toxic traits in men. They won't say it like that, but that's like oftentimes they're like, men are tough, they can deal with this sermon. We're gonna get stern with the men here, right? The church leaders will do that. But they won't do it with the women. They won't do it with the women. So you have men that largely haven't changed. They largely know their role. They're largely the same. And then the stats show you have women being pushed in the opposite direction, more liberal, more promiscuous, more apt to be supportive of LGBTQWXYZ, their body rights, abortion, whatever, all these other things that are very secular, right? And then just even if you don't go that far extreme, they just don't have any type of accountability or standards. So he was asking me, he's like, do we really want to like talk to the women? And like, when do you talk to the women? I was like, how about you just preach to both? Because churches are already dedicating multiple sermons to men, right? About how men need to be. Why not do that for the women too? You're already doing it for the men. It's like a double standard. Or there's an argument, don't address the men specifically on this, and then don't address the women. How about that? You're all for equality. How about let's stop hounding on the men and then stop hounding on the women? I think my personal opinion is, why not hound on the men and hound on the women? Why not both, right? It takes two to tango. We know that 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and I think it's 90% among college women. So women are leaving their husbands most of the time. So let's be honest, I think the women need a talking to. How about we do that? Or let's just keep it equal. Let's not talk to either the men or the women and just keep it really like baseline surface level, or just talk to both. But let's not do what we're doing and what we've been doing forever, where we only talk to the men and women are just these perfect angels that don't need any type of sermon, like talking about stuff like this. When's the last time you've heard a sermon addressing how many sermons do you hear about like calling men to love their wives, love them, die for them, all this stuff, all good stuff, right? We hear a lot of those sermons. How often do you hear a sermon that's like, women, you were made for men. You were made from man and for man. How many times do you hear a sermon on that? Never. I've been going to church my whole life. Like never, ever, ever. So that just shows the severe disconnect, the severe one-sided of the church. That's why it's hostile towards men. That's why it's hostile, man. That right there. It's very subtle, but it's very real. It's very widespread. It's everywhere. So anyways, I think like another example is like, think of a Mother's Day sermon. Like churches, on Mother's Day will give a sermon, and then on Father's Day. On Father's Day, oftentimes the sermon is like very discouraging. It's very much like, we need more men, not leaving their kids. We need men, stepping up and not beating their wives. And we need men, like, all this stuff, just hounding on you. Like, it's true stuff, but that's the message. It's usually a critique in some nice way with like a little bow on top. And then the Mother's Day sermon is like, wow, can all the women stand up in the congregation? All the mothers? Let's clap for the mothers. Like, wonderful. Women, you are just like fantastic, right? Oh gosh. Anyways, it's so blatant. It's so obvious. And you almost have to just push back on it a little bit. Get a little bit radical to push back on some of this stuff, because it's so subtle. But once you've escaped it, once you see what's going on, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere. It's just there, man. It's just there. So, yeah, and those are the different notes that God made. Man is made in the image of God and reflects God's glory. Woman reflects man's glory. For the first man didn't come from woman, but the first woman came from man. And man was not made for woman, but woman was made for man. That is the way God structured things. That is the role I mean, if you go to church, you probably haven't read this unless you read your own Bible. You wouldn't have heard this verse, let alone a sermon on it, right? But that is the structure. So let's acknowledge it. And I guarantee you, the closer we get to biblical relationships, biblical preaching like this, the further we need to distance ourselves from society and the teachings of society. It's becoming indistinguishable. The church is becoming indistinguishable from the world. And just look at the parents and the families in the church. The fact you're not teaching these things means the parents don't know what to do, so they just do what the world does. And then they start caring more about their girl's education than their girl's like ability to remain celibate, and just like they care more about the girl's ability to provide for herself than to find a husband for her, or for her to find a husband, for her, to go through life without a ton of baggage. They care more about hounding on the men and beating the men up than they do empowering the men, right? And telling the men, like, this is how it is. Women, this is how it is. So, yeah, to be honest, and with how many people go to church, right, with how many Christians are in our society, a lot of those statistics, right, are, like, the church is complacent in it. Think of how many people go to church, right? The church has a big effect on culture, a big one. So, in some sense, the problems we're dealing with right now can be partially attributed to the teachings in the church, or the lack of teachings. That's why I care so much about it. It's not because I got a vice with the church. It's because I look at what's going on around me. We all do. Let's be honest. We all see what's going on. And we can't just blame the government. We can't blame some, like, feminist women, some, like, I don't know. I don't even know the names, but, like, people on the left and people in whatever. You can't blame them. You got to look at where these people are going to church and what they're hearing and what they're learning, right? If these problems were happening in spite of the truth being taught in the church, then the church is not liable. People are going to do what they do. But what's happening is we can look to the church and we can see the deficiency going on here. How men aren't supported. How men are always to blame, and how women can do no wrong. And then we see society falling apart, and we're like, well, you're going to be held partially responsible for this. People in leadership, pastors, Sunday school teachers, the older men in the church. You need to be held responsible for some of this, because some of this is your fault. And men have woken up to it. They've woken up to it, man. So we need a change. I think the change starts with us. The change starts with, like, in instances like this last weekend, or this last week on this hunting trip, when you get an opportunity, talk about it. And be honest. Don't mince words. Be honest, man. I laid it all out. I'm like, this is what's going on. This is, this is how it is. And, we didn't totally agree on stuff. He didn't totally agree on everything, that I was saying. But he was cordial, and we had the conversation, and it was good. And he's in a position of leadership in the church. So when you have an opportunity, man, be honest, be truthful about what's going on. That's the only way, or that's like a step in the right direction, I suppose, for change, for us, right? Stay in the Word.